The file server network architecture will be discussed in this module. The file server network architecture is one of the implementations of the client server network architecture. What exactly is the file server network architecture? Consider the network as follows. We have client C1, client C2, and a server that we would call as S1. In this case, we can implement a file server architecture on this server. What do we need for this network to function? First of all, we need a network operating system such as Windows 2003, and of course we need client operating systems such as the Windows XP. With this combination of hardware and software, we are now ready to implement a file server network. What is a file server network? A file server network simply allows the storage on the network server to be shared among the different clients. There is no more functional aspect than to simply share the storage on the server by the different clients on the network. So in the case of a file server network, the server can be viewed as nothing more than a shared storage. That simply is the implementation of the file server architecture. What does this imply in terms of, first, the application execution? Consider an application that is executed on this computer. Let us assume that we have a database that runs on this client here, which is C1, and let us say that we want to select the names of all the students in the class where the class ID is CIS 485 or 484. In this particular case, let us see how the program is executed. In order to get this information, of course, we will load the DBMS on the client itself. Now, when we perform the search as indicated by this command, we will bring the data file from the server to the client where the search is performed. So in other words, the application in this case, that is in the case of the file server architecture, is executed entirely on the client. As mentioned earlier, in this particular case, the server is used as only a shared storage where we have the data files stored for sharing among the different clients. Anytime we need to get information from the data file or any other file that is stored on the server, we need to bring that file to the client for all execution purposes. Now that we have answered the first question as to the place of execution of the application, which is entirely on the clients, and the second question we need to answer is in terms of the network traffic. Because of the fact that the files that are stored on the server need to be brought to the client at all times, we will experience very high traffic on the network in the case of the file server architecture. Now, the third question that we need to answer here is the total cost of ownership. What does that mean in terms of file server architecture? We have to maintain the clients with the full operating system, such as, say, for example, Windows XP, and we also need to maintain a server with the data files and the network operating system. In a study conducted by the Gartner Group, incidentally, Gartner Group is a popular group that makes many analyses and studies concerning IT. It found out that in maintaining a network, the majority of the cost in the maintenance of a network comes from the maintenance of a client, such as maintaining, for example, clients that run the Windows XP operating system. These clients are known as thick clients. Why is that so? Because of the fact when you install operating systems like Windows XP, and on top of that when you install applications such as Office, they together take a large amount of storage and resources on the clients, and to maintain these applications one requires a lot of effort. So in terms of the total cost of ownership of a network, the Gartner Group has found that the majority of the cost contribution comes from the maintenance of the clients. In this particular case, we can say that the total cost of ownership is indeed very high. And finally, in terms of security, what can we say? To some extent, we can say the security is good. Why is that so? Because of the fact that all client-server architectures enforce user-level access control. In other words, the resources can be controlled based on user privileges. Each user may be given a different privilege to the resources. In addition to that, we also have the data files, etc., stored in a central place. So there is a degree of security, but it is not as secure as we might want. Why is that so? Because the data files are often transmitted over the network to the different clients. This is not a very desirable effect or desirable outcome of the file server architecture. So once again, let's summarize. The applications execute entirely on the clients. The data traffic is high. The total cost of ownership is high in the case of file server architecture. And finally, we do have security, but it could be better. Here are some important points that pertain to the file server architecture. For example, the shared data is stored on the server and it is brought to the client for processing. You may also store shared application software, such as, for example, a multi-user version of the Office application software that could be brought and executed on the client. And we know that the entire execution takes place at the client. So what happens? Consequently, there is considerable network traffic that is generated as the files are ported to the or transported to the client for processing. Now, a quick point of observation here is that as we study later on the application server architecture, we will see that the files are not brought to the client for the execution of the application, especially in the case of a database. So as a matter of fact, the application server therefore will generate much less network traffic. Therefore, what are some of the concerns with file server architecture? We need powerful clients. Why is that so? Because the application is executed on the clients. The total cost of ownership is high. We have thick clients, and of course there is more network traffic generated. Security, as we mentioned earlier, is we could term it as adequate. This brings us to the end of this discussion on file server network functional architecture.